Dennis, thanks for joining us, especially coming off the Shaping event on sports and innovation. Your keynote on football, the game that became a holiday and changed America, is an amazing read. But now you're looking outward to the sort of the 100-year anniversary and reimagining, or not reimagining, but imagining truly what this game can do as a overarching impact on global culture and global economic impact. So we thought it would be an amazing kind of follow-up conversation, and thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, and I was honored to be invited to the Changing Connecticut's Future. That was the 6th annual, right?
Sixth or seventh?
That was our 7th. So
excellent. Yeah. So and it was fun. Looking forward and comparing it to the 40 years that have preceded is pretty interesting. And 40 years ago, cable television was the thing on the rise. Mm-hmm. 40 years ago, in 1985, ESPN had not yet reached 50% penetration in the United States. When I was working at ESPN, you still had to explain what the ESPN, that's the entertainment, and that's not the Eastern sports programming,
Yeah.
So it hadn't so cable was the big thing. Cable was spreading across America, and now, 40 years later, cable is only in 40% of American homes, whereby 99% of American homes have a subscription on demand, TV subscription on demand.
Of some type, yeah.
So now project 40 years from now. 40 years from now, they may be looking back, remember the days when they were doing all this streaming and they were sprinted, there was splintered and all this. Who knows what lies ahead, but certainly change lies ahead, and that's exciting to talk about.
So it's, something that you kind of pose early is, the scale that the Super Bowl offers as a platform. And I think for many, they see the 12 minutes of the halftime show that is the most viewed programming, annually, the amount of press leading up to the dollars associated with advertising. And the question is, how can it get any bigger, right? Doesn't it hit a point where there's people tire, or there's nothing, no other sort of thing
activation.
There's nothing else to expand into.
Well, you
see it differently, which is
I see the growth markets are those outside the United States, and the United States has about 330 million people, and our population is kind of scaling down. Fewer people. Just on the news a couple of nights ago, people are attributing having smaller families to it's too expensive. Mm-hmm. So the growth in numbers is not going to be in the United States. The growth may be in the cost of the price of commercials will grow, but I see the growth markets as being international, and that's why the NFL, since 2007, they started this international series of games, and this coming season, starting this fall, there are going to be 5 different countries hosting these international games, including Madrid, Spain. And if you look at what the ratings were, over 60 million people outside the United States were watching the Super Bowl at any one point. Mm-hmm. And that's almost half of those who are watching in the United States, which was an average of 127.7 million. And whenever they give the numbers, the rating number, it's always per minute. It's an average per minute. Because if you say, all right, 127.7 million people were watching, but there are over 300 million people in the United States, you mean there are over 200 million people who don't care?
Right.
No, it's just the per minute, because they get that gauge for advertisers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If an advertiser is going to buy in the game, they need to know, all right, how many people am I going to hit in my minute, or my 30 seconds? So anyway, but half the number are now watching outside the United States. And the NFL sees a lot of potential growth. They've already got 27 media rights deals with territories and countries outside the United States. And one of the territories is as big as, one of them is Africa. Mm-hmm. And ESPN has the international media rights deal for all of Africa. And you think about the size there, and they also have what they call their global markets program. The NFL has this global markets program where for the last several years, teams have been assigned or they've gotten these international markets. Like if you look forward to the game in Spain, the Chicago Bears and the Miami Dolphins are the two teams that have these international markets for Spain. And what they've been doing is cultivating interest in their two teams, making merchandise available. I mean, if you went to Madrid, I don't know how many Miami Dolphins jerseys you might see, but you might see some. And the league has always said that their success lies with the loyalty to teams. If you are, I've been a Dolphins fan since I worked in Miami, right? Well,
So am I. So
yeah,
sorry.
there you go. And my son, who lives in the Boston area, you think he would be a Patriots fan. He is stuck with the Dolphins because of this influence of parents. So everybody has a team. Well, if you're in Madrid and you show up with the game that's going to be played there this fall, and people have got Dolphins tattoos or Bears hats, this kind of thing, that's exactly what the NFL is looking for.
Well, it's like what we're starting to see in the States around soccer. And, you have dedicated bars or restaurants that are, have specific fan viewing parties. You have, people that are very loyal that have adopted the game. And it's not completely out of the realm of consideration that goes the other way, right? And that's interesting to your point of they've been cultivating the fans, because that was always the question. It's like, how do they, beyond just the interest in the sport, but how do you start to build that community? So the fact that they're kind of going grassroots to focus on these specific regions is smart.
So I lived in London for 10 years, and American football is huge there.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because like the way they did it, the way that they're doing it, I feel like is actually through flag football. So like the Jags, they have, I think they're like the official kind of like team in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't know why, they just have a huge presence. But I played in a couple flag football tournaments, the Jag 7, and I think they're doing that obviously so that they can get to kids, It's like they can try and convert adults, but if they can get kids in the game, then that's an easy pipeline to fandom. But I think there's also a shitload of expats in the UK, so they're kind of spreading the gospel. And the same thing, like, in Madrid, like, I don't know if the NFL has any plans to like Singapore and things like that, but like these expat, hubs could play a part in that. But it's like interesting, like when you go to Wembley for any game, like you see every single jersey of every single team represented, regardless of who's playing. Yeah. It's like you get Brits, Germans, Italians, French, and they're like, we're just happy to be here. Yeah. Like we're just so happy to be here.
Yeah. But in the next 40 years, that'll change.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So it's like the fandom, but then it's like you need to create like more tribalism with a specific team. So,
and the Tottenham Hotspurs, I think, just created a stadium that's up to NFL standards.
Yes, it was built in 2019, just finished, and it is built to NFL specifications.
Yeah.
So no changes would need to be made if a team were to be based in London, which is one of the things that I predict in the book, which is the football game that changed America, how the NFL created a national holiday. 40 years ago, the Super Bowl was only 17, 18 years old. It only started in 1967, and it wasn't the top-rated TV show, and now it has gone way beyond that. And with the introduction of supersonic transport, which is going to be happening between now and 2030, 2031, those people the teams will be able to get from the East Coast to London in less than 4 hours. And you mentioned Singapore. You'll also be able to get from the West Coast to Tokyo and to Singapore in less than 10 hours. Yeah. Because the speed of these jets they have run off They're off the factory line. In North Carolina, Boom Technologies they're producing this jet called the Overture, and it seats 65 to 70 people, all in business class, and there are over 150 orders for these jets from Japan Airlines, from United.
How fast are they going to go?
The
40.
Double 1,300 miles per hour.
Good Lord.
Wow.
Yes.
So that's like twice.
That changes the world.
Yeah.
And the NFL is prepared for a changing world.
Yeah.
They're not going to be surprised by this. They've been doing all of this global reach and the games all over. They'll be back in Dublin this year. And what they want to do is establish the same kind of global market that you mentioned that World Soccer has. The NFL sees their mission to grow gridiron football, grow American football, and there may be a few bumps in the road with tariffs in the way and all the rest of that stuff. But long term, their goal is to grow their sport so that it rivals World Cup soccer and international soccer. And that, yes, you have people from all over the world wearing their jerseys from every team when an NFL game shows up. So, and they want to grow grow the league. Again, if you look back to 1985, it was a smaller league. There have been newer teams that have grown in that now we accept, right? So that's all part of the long-term plan, and I think that the smart people at the NFL have got this pretty well figured out. There are certain things that I'm sure will surprise them along the road, but that is the plan. So there will be teams in a lot of places that we don't currently have teams once Super Bowl 100 rolls around in 2066.
Mm-hmm. It feels like the only place that maybe, and it's not that they can't overcome it, but maybe it's the last in the playbook, so to speak, is international players. The other leagues seem to pull from an international pool. You see a lot of diversity.
Pull where they're pulling rugby players from.
Well, but
just go to New Zealand.
That's where, to your point earlier of like getting kids involved, whether it's through flag or other avenues. Like, let's be honest, right? Like, Americans are kind of like built different for a lot of different reasons, right? So like baseball skills somewhat translate. Otani's an outlier, but it seems like the growing the play and growing the training elements in these other areas are going to be a big portion of it.
That's actually at the top of the list for the NFL. What they're trying to do is grow the skills of international players so that, because again, you look at the league now, it has far more international players than back in 1985. 1985, if you had an Aussie kicker, oh my goodness, this was a focus of attention. Yeah. And now you've got players from a whole lot of different countries playing out there. And that again is, all right, the people in those countries see their homegrown kid out there all grown up and playing in this new sport. That's something that they're going to want to follow. And that is, again, part of the goal. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have just an all-American branded sport playing in different countries. Yeah, they want to have an international branded sport playing in internationally.
Right.
Lots of people named Magnus,
On the line.
I feel like that growing that international pathway program and globalization and expansion have to go hand in hand, though, because I feel like the one logistical problem that they're going to have from a player's perspective is a lot of people or a lot of players are going to have a tough time relocating their families to a team in London, right? It's like, wow, you just got traded. Oh, where did I get traded to? You get traded to London. It's like, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, but doesn't that happen like already with like soccer? Like
it
you're
does.
going where you're going.
Right, but I feel like it doesn't, when it's in the continental United States, I feel like it's a little bit easier just with, plane travel.
Or like even London may be different, but like you grew up in Texas and you get traded to, Germany, and now all of a sudden you don't speak, the language. Your family's uprooted.
There's lots of expats, tons.
Yeah, and you know what? And I'll tell you, once the supersonic transport kicks in, being traded from particularly any team from the central part of the United States to the East Coast, it's not going to be so hard to get back to see grandma and grandpa for Thanksgiving because you'll be able to get back over there. And the team will be covering the costs of your travel with your family. And, you know, from international travel, you guys have all been to Europe, they speak English a whole lot better than we do. You know, so there's those, and that is a tribute to the educational systems where English is taught as, this is, you got to have this second language. And if you want to succeed in this business, my wife has a cousin who lives in Rome, and he's worked for the Bank d'Italia, the Italian banking system, for many, many years. And he told us, he said, the international language of banking is English. Because if you get a conference call with a banker from Germany and a banker from Spain, and he's the banker from Italy, you can't be figuring out what to do. You just all speak in English. Same way with air traffic controllers. All of them, regardless of whether you're from Kuwait or whether you're from the United States or wherever, Canada, you've got to speak. You got to speak English so that you can be understood. So that's more and more becoming this global language. And again, that plays into the NFL's hands, I think.
Or we're going to have earpieces that are translating it in real time by then anyway.
We'll have
like
chips
there's not
by
gonna, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yep.
So beyond air travel and the ability to access these markets with greater speed, how is technology and AI and media shifts and consumer shifts going to change the landscape and change the game or change the events in and around it?
Well, that's a broad set of changes.
Well, set it up for you to go wherever you want it.
If you look at what is possible now, you have to project forward that there'll be very little need for referees and umpires by the time 26.
Hopefully.
20, well, because as I said in my presentation at Foxwoods, every single one of these stadiums will be three-dimensionally geo-mapped down to the square millimeter. So you won't have to go under the hood to go see, was this player out of bounds? Was this player illegally touching another player, hitting at a certain point? It will all be there, and AI will be able to interpret it. And okay, this is the algorithm by which we need to find out, all right, this is a penalty, this is what isn't. And so I think you'll be able to, it should be a faster game, which also benefits television viewers in particular. I also think that there will be a need for a reduction in the length of television commercials. Because if you have a 3-minute break away from the action with more and more different distractions that people can do during a break, during 3 minutes, it's a long time. And it's not as good for the people on site. And this past year, the NFL had fewer fans in their stands collectively than they did the previous year.
Yeah.
What they really need to focus on improving the quality of the on-site experience. So if that means that there will be commercial messages on the bottom of cleats or wherever it is, but because international soccer has got commercial messages all over the jerseys, all over the kits, but they don't have commercials during play.
They don't have stoppage either. And I think that's like the international. It's like when you go and you watch rugby or you go watch soccer, like it doesn't stop, you know? And fans, like I remember going with my buddies to a football game. They're like, Jesus Christ, this is taking forever, you know? So, but then the technology part, like with like what you did in tennis, you know, with what is it?
Shot spot,
shot spot. You know, that made things really easy, you know, on review. But that was how long ago did you do that? That was
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah, introduced
like,
that.
Why didn't they adopt that in other sports? Like,
well, it's you know, I came back after we did this experiment. We had it for 2 weeks at the French Open. And I come back and said to the baseball guys, hey, you know, they can just set up this box and they can tell you where the ball is now. And they're finally getting it to it, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of these things where there's tradition dies hard. And when you have to look at the pluses and minuses. And it's very easy. Most people resist change. Regardless of who we are, we resist change. It's that we're comfortable with the status quo. Our comfort level gets shaken when we see change. So it's been a while, but the technology has existed. And another thing that I think that is going to improve the on-site experience as we go forward is the 1st and 10 line will be visible. They've already run tests on, you can show the people in the stands, oh, that's on television, and there it is, right on the field. Part of the problem there has been the Players Association's fear that, there's going to be some laser at the side, and my player on the field is going to look up from being tackled and get a laser in his eye or something like that. And they've gone way past that, but that's, again, fear of change. Now, if you want to get more people to the stadiums, that is one of the things that you can improve their experience. Oh, there it is. They've got to meet this line. Did they cross it? Did they not? And when you get into geo-mapping, it'll tell you immediately whether, and it's not just a fuzzy 5-inch wide line like you'd put down with lime painted. It is the exact distance. So that plus a lot of other things the NFL will be working on. Hey, we don't want to abandon the on-site experience. You talked about media. The bulk of their income is now coming from media,
deals,
but they have to be able to sell to sponsors. They've got to have a product themselves that is going to attract investment. So it's a tough nut to crack, but the NFL is going to look more at these on-site games as this is a festival. Yeah. This is something that we can enjoy, bring your families, and another thing will be pricing. And
it seems like it's going to have to be because, you mentioned like the decline in attendance because many people feel if they actually want to watch the game, you have a better viewing experience at home now. Whether you're into the stats or you want to see sort of the overall picture of what's going on, bathrooms there, food's there, there's much more convenience. So it feels like that's an element of how do they create either enough surprise and delight and experience to make up for that at the game, or use technology to weave more of that kind of at-home viewing experience into your physical seat.
Right. When you've got on television, not only can you see the 1st and 10 line, but you can also see all of the different angles from the pylon cameras down in the corners. And the pylon cameras were developed by Ed Placey, who lives here in Connecticut, for ESPN. It was his great idea. And we should put, these cameras in so we can see. And each of those pylons has got 4 cameras in it. You look down the line, you look up the line, coming in, the line back out as it extends, so easy in the end zone or out of the end zone. And now they've got a camera looking straight up so that if somebody dives over, you can see the dive is great. And the reason I bring that up is you get that as the part of the television and part of the media product. You don't get that in the stands.
You also don't get the broadcasters providing a little bit more context. The other thing with the NFL is there's about 7-8 million rules, and if you're having grown up watching it, you're like, what the fuck is going on here? Right. So you do have the assistance of the broadcasters who may or may not be right, like Chris Collinsworth, who's always wrong, but you understand more about what the hell is happening. If you hadn't if there was some kind of app or piece of technology that allowed people to understand what the implications were of a single play that just happened, they'd probably be able to invest themselves in watching it and understanding it a little bit more.
From a producer or director's perspective of live events and live sports events, all that technology, does that make your work easier or harder?
You know what? If your end goal is to attract viewers with your content and keep them watching longer. So your ratings go up if more people are watching all at the same time, because there's people going to be tuning in, tuning out. But if there's content that makes it more interesting for the viewer, that's your success. What you need to do is then, in your editorial judgment, what should we do here? What should we do at this point? You don't need a Hawkeye or ShotSpot, a replay of every single ball hit in a tennis match, because then it would just be so repetitive. You have to use it at critical moments. But at any time when new technology is introduced, then the temptation is, oh, we got to show this off. So you wind up, there's the temptation on the part of producers to, we're going to do a little bit more with this. And then what you do is you find a happy medium. You find what viewers are enjoying more, what's adding to the information. Because if you add information about what the situation is and how things need to be changed, all right, this, or like the Celtics, you're ahead by 20. What needs to be done to protect that lead? Those guys, danger's on danger, right? They needed yellow and black police tape across some of those games. Like, wait a minute. So as a producer, though, you look at it as a tool, along with all of the other tools that you have. And you have a toolbox which includes the commentators and the camera operators and the audio. And one of the NFL's primary goals has been over the years to improve the audio that you can hear from the field without hearing any expletives.
Bleeps,
But this course that I've taught at Syracuse University for the past 15 years is about the Super Bowl and society. And what I hold up as a goal for these games is, all right, let's watch this portion of a game recorded by NFL Films. And NFL Films is at the Super Bowl, they've got 44 cameras all over the place. And they're recording the actual audio from players on the field, from players on the sidelines. And you could do without a lot of commentators if you could weave in all that great audio.
That's cool.
They're talking to each other. And isn't as now what they've done is the NFL's decided that we don't want our programming littered with what could be objectionable audio, objectionable words. However, looking forward, 40 years from now, there will be an NFL Films channel. You can decide to go, this is what I want to listen to. And I'm okay with hearing a few expletives now and then, because it's going to give me a much better experience.
Or you're gonna have a channel, or a feed for every camera, and then they'll probably
for every
the
player
AI will
too.
be able to remove any expletives.
Yes.
Essentially in real time. So you could have a PG version, you could have the raw version. You could go on one sideline, the other sideline.
You
player
gotta be pretty
perspective.
guarded with what you're saying too. Like I would because I'm
Well,
certain.
I
As
mean,
far as strategies go, and
but that's that becomes early on. Players are against it. Then they realize the no fun league. That's their opportunity to have their personality shine through, and then they get their own, broader fan base because people identify with who they are, and so it's all that.
Like a camera in their helmets, and then you can watch from the player's perspective in VR. And
that's the kind of things that are going to have to fill airtime, right? If you make the game more efficient, players are going to have concerns up front because all those little breaks are great spots to breathe and rest, right? And now if you're saying, no, you're just playing 60 minutes straight through, then, that becomes concern. But it probably does have to come back from right now of a broadcast, 5% of broadcast time is actually NFL action. Versus for soccer, it's 50%, basketball is 34%.
5%?
5%. 10% for baseball, 42% for hockey.
Wow.
So and they've still managed to captivate when
Right.
when
But like the length of
there's 11 minutes of actual action.
So it's like the MLB, like with instituting the pitch clock, right?
Yeah.
Games went from like 3 or 5 hours to like 2, and it's like dramatically increased fandom and like the way that people perceive the games. You know, it's like, dude, it takes so long for these games
Now,
sometimes.
regardless of what these separate feeds are, say if we're projecting to what we'll have available to us in 2066, and you said cameras and helmets, which we did cameras and helmets when I was in charge of our horse racing product. And it only works if you got the camera on a horse that's in the middle of the pack. Because you put a camera on a horse that's going to be at the front, you're just going to see dirt for a mile. You know, really. But the one point I want to make is, regardless of what these channels are, the Americans particularly, and I think fans around the world, are not going to want to sit there and try to switch from camera to camera. You know, if you give them every camera, that's overwhelming. You want to sit and watch a sporting event. You want to sit back and enjoy it. So you're going to want a directed feed. Whatever it is, there may be multiple directors directing one feed, directing another feed, but you're going to want to sit back and have this be enjoyable. You don't want, nobody watching sports wants to work. You've been working, whatever you've been doing. You guys are working, you know. I'm kind of working. You know, you don't want to have to work when you watch sports. In fact, the origin of the word sport goes back to the 14th century, and it has the same root as transport, to take you away from your loathsome life. Imagine what the 14th century was like, the 1300s. Yeah, no indoor plumbing, you know, no toothbrushes. You know what I mean? It just was, but so sport took you away from your humdrum, objectionable life and gave you something to watch. So that's what people want. And they don't want to work at it because your whole regular life has been working at whatever you do.
Well, and the early stages of that you're seeing, right? Like if you watch, at least if you're trying to find a game on YouTube TV, they basically, it says like, which feed do you want to watch, right? Like which local feed, or, you know, it's giving you the options to have your split screens, and you can have your stat overlay. So, you know, it's like if we're there now, in 40 years, just imagine, you know, what that's going to be, and it's going to be curated. It's going to be we could be watching the same thing, have an earpiece in, and we're getting two different.
Well, it's kind of like what
overlays.
they do. Like you watch it on broadcast, like on CBS or something like that. But it doesn't Nickelodeon. You can watch the
slime feed,
Yeah.
and you
Like
got
that
the
kind of
Manning
thing.
cast. And
Yeah. And then Ed Placey, the guy I mentioned earlier, is also from Connecticut, and he was the guy who did the first Manning cast. And I'm talking about Connecticut innovators. That goes back to what we talk about, shaping Connecticut's future. You don't necessarily have to have an NFL team based in Connecticut, but if you're a fan and you think of what is it that could make this better, and then if you develop a plan and then put together a business plan, this is what it would take and the timing, and then present that, there are companies out there that said, hey, Ed, hey, Dennis, that's a really good idea. We would like to develop that wherever you are. So I think that there are opportunities in the world for creative people to innovate. And all you need to do is ask one question. Why is it like that now? Because if you can imagine it being better than what it is now, then let's project. Let's make a plan. Create something out of the blue. And that opportunity is for people in Connecticut and 49 other states and the District of Columbia.
but mostly Connecticut.
Yeah, mostly. There you go. But mostly Connecticut. That's right. Yes.
So when you were talking about what the fan experience could be, something that came up, which I thought was really interesting, was the sale of multiple tickets to the same seat with, you know, this new ability to have virtual reality ticket stub as well as a physical one.
That's cool.
When you say, you know, what could be, like, do we have to worry about, or at what point would the line get drawn? Because I could see that being taken so far as there isn't even stadiums anymore, right? It's just a box with the game happening, and they sell an infinite amount of virtual tickets, right? And you're piping in fan noise or whatever to keep the players motivated. But, you no longer have to spend $2 billion on a stadium. You need an area to play the game, and everything else can be virtual.
I think that there's an excitement in us as human beings going to a place where there's a great deal of energy and excitement with other human beings. And I don't think that's going to change within 40 years. And the reason I mentioned the Super Bowl is that the NFL could sell an infinite number of tickets. When us four guys, we could get together and say, hey, come on over to my house, and I'm going to buy this, and we can all sit and watch the Super Bowl as if we're sitting 4 seats next to each other. But that wouldn't happen until they'd sold out all of the 70,000 seats in the arena. And there's such a special thing about an arena experience, and that's why the NFL is focused on, we got to make sure that this on-site experience is really, really special. And the music comes into that. You would not, if you could just buy Taylor Swift music and never see her in concert. I mean, just last week or the other week, she sold out 3 consecutive 60,000 seats. There's 180,000 people, but there are probably still more people who want to watch. So if you sell out the 180,000, then there might be 180,000 more who would like to get that experience, but you're in your home. So you put on the digital headset, and it's VR, so it's all generated. And these are amazing, because what you could do is, if you turn your head one way, you're seeing what is out the end zone, or you're seeing, it is the exact feeling that you're there, except you don't get the smell, and of course that might work between now and 2066. That might come with it.
Go to the bathroom, wait in line, pee in the trough.
Right.
There's a sports bar in, I think, Vegas or something, where the wall is like an end zone seat. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but when you see it on video, you can't even tell that it's a screen. It's so high def, and it's almost like you're in the stadium.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I can imagine one of the options might be, whenever I worked at ESPN in remote production for 20 years. And one of the coolest things was being in the TV truck and seeing all of the feeds, then all of the cameras, and the biggest screen was the directed feed. But you got to hear what the director was saying, and ready 6, take 6, roll red. And they always give colors or different names to tape machines, so that you're not taking X when it should be X for the camera. So CBS uses all cats. They use Jaguar and Ocelot and Tiger.
John Gruden
take
to make
Tiger,
those.
It's just a lot of fun. So that could be an option, to go to a bar.
Yeah.
If ESPN revived the ESPN sports zones, where if you could revive this and go in there, and for any sporting event, sit like you're in the director's chair and hear the director and still hear the commentators. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
innovation.
40 years from now, right? I'm hoping that we're beyond a headset, right? Or that we're beyond putting something on ourselves, and it's in the environment. And you extend that, for whatever reason, my mind was going to the celebration of New Year's around the world. If this becomes a global, truly event at each major stadium, you could project the game. You could sell Super Bowl tickets in every country to people to attend the game live, and it becomes
You could still have the festival
a hologram
experience
of the
too,
game
right?
on the field.
Yeah.
Right.
As it's happening in real life, right?
That'd be dope.
And that would be, again, reaching out to a more global audience. And you can't get it at home, but you can go to your arena, like watching your favorite team in the Final Four. You go to Gamble Pavilion or wherever you go to watch them, and you're with a group of people.
Yeah.
Right.
That's part of it, is that social connection that sport provides.
Well, and in those types of scenarios too. Obviously, the halftime show has come up as a big piece of the entertainment and how that expands and gets multicultural and things like that. But you could almost envision multiple halftime shows going on at once, for the different markets, different interests, that kind of thing.
More.
Yeah. I mean, hip hop music was not around in 1985. Right, it was just the Chicago Bears.
It was
the Chicago Bears.
So-and-so
the Super Bowl
orchestra or
shuffle?
the band, right?
Right, they did the Super Bowl Shuffle, which was kind of hip hop, right? And hip hop has dominated the halftime for the Super Bowl for the last 5 or 6 years. I don't know what we'll be listening to and what you guys may be listening to in the year 2066, because I'll be a centurion myself. But I don't think it'll be hip hop. It'll be the next generation of whatever it is that we find entertaining,
Hopefully
that we
it's not
enjoy.
mumble rap.
I feel like hip hop and country are just starting to blend.
They are.
They're merging.
They are. Country's coming back for sure.
But it's not really country.
Right, it changes.
It's
right.
pop.
Yeah.
It is pop. Yeah. What about the NFL and the fan experience and providing new ways for growing fandom and new ways for people to experience the game? Like, is Goodell getting with whatever the name is of the owner of the NBA and the MLB and the NHL? Are they coming together and talking about this and borrowing best practices from one another, or are they just kind of seeing stuff and stealing tips and
I
stuff?
feel like they're probably just stealing.
Wouldn't you love to go to that meeting? The commissioners of all of these sports.
Yeah. The
course,
evil empire.
The commissioner of the NFL has got this advantage in that his championship game is watched by about 100 million more people than any of these other leagues. So he could sit on high and sit at the throne and say, all right, you guys, when you get up to about half, maybe you get to 60 million people watching the game, then come back to me. But no, I mean, there's certainly coordination that goes on. The NBA is not going to play meaningful games on the night of the Super Bowl,
Right.
and the Masters is not going to be on a weekend when you've got a playoff game in the NHL or whatever. So there is a coordination as far as timing goes.
It's like the Coke and Pepsi sales cycle. They've agreed 100 years ago that they alternate weeks. So if you go in the grocery store, they're never on sale the same week.
It's like mutually assured self-destruction.
I think it's very interesting. Pepsi for 10 years was the naming sponsor for the halftime of the Super Bowl. They gave that up. Actually, the price got too high for them. They didn't want to renew because the NFL saw this is such a valuable property. And Apple Music came in at basically double what Pepsi was paying. But Pepsi is now the number 3 selling soft drink in the United States, behind Coke and Sprite. And that is not where Pepsi wanted to be. And I'm not going to say I'm attributing it just to the sponsorship of the Pepsi halftime, but Pepsi did a great job of turning that into a 4 or 5 month marketing campaign. And the introduction of who the act was going to be, and then videos that went with that, and
Teasers of all the features
exactly.
How has the NFL been able to capitalize on all of their assets, right? Because the NFL Combine is watched by millions of people. The draft is watched by millions of people. Because I kind of had an aha moment a couple of weeks ago where I had the choice to watch an NBA playoff game or round 2 or 3 of the NFL draft. I'm a big football fan, so maybe that's why. But I chose the NFL draft, and then it just hit me. I'm like, they are such a juggernaut.
Shore was still dropping.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Now, there's a really good story in this book about in 1980, the Super Bowl was 12, 13 years old, right? And the president of 1980 was the first 4 or 5 months that ESPN had been on the air. That had been available. It's not technically the air. And the president at the time, Chet Simmons, went to the Super Bowl in January of 1980. And he corners the NFL's head of communications, a guy by the name of Val Pinchbeck, who had been the director of communications at Syracuse University before joining the NFL. He goes to Val Pinchbeck and he says, Val, is there anything that we, ESPN, this just baby of a network, could do with the NFL? And Val Pinchbeck says to him, well, you know what? We're a little concerned that after the Super Bowl, people don't pay attention to the NFL until the first game in September. So, and I got this secondhand, obviously. I didn't get it from Chet Simmons, but I got it from Bill Fitz, who was the head of production for ESPN at the time. And because Chet Simmons comes back to Bill Fitz and says, we want to do this, we want to do the draft.
Yeah.
So Val Pinchbeck said, you know, well, we've got the draft and we've got this combine. And so Chet Simmons says, we'll televise the draft. He's never been to a draft. He was head of NBC Sports, and he worked at ABC Sports before that. But so he's working at ESPN, but he never did the draft. And he comes back to ESPN, and Bill Fitz says to him, "Do the draft? Chet, have you been to a draft? It's a bunch of guys in a room sitting on phones, and they've got a blackboard. It's very TV unfriendly." So Chet says, "Well, you're a creative guy. Make it TV friendly." And what he did was then he hired one of these NFL scout type guys, right? And he went through who were the potential top 2 rounds picks. And then they sought to get video of all of those top 10 videotapes, not little discs, videotapes from the universities. Have you got video of this lineman? Have you got video of, and they got video into ESPN of everyone but I think one player who got drafted in the first 2 rounds. Yeah. So they were able to have a desk, and it was just basically 3 guys sitting at this desk, and they were at the draft, and then when somebody was drafted, they could actually roll in video, and they made it into it. So that was part of, the NFL realized that, yes, there was a gap. So now they have in their marketing department, they've got this wheel. It's a 12-month wheel with these are all the things that are our tentpole events for each of these months. And the flag football championship is in one of them. And the draft went from 1 day to 3 days, and became a multi-network event. So that was part of their reasoning in that, we see that there's a gap. And they've been very good at filling gaps.
Yeah, yeah, because they had, twice the entire population of Green Bay attended the draft, right?
Right, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And their idea to make it into more of a people event.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's gained, those spectacle moments throughout the years when Mel Kiper got called out by the Colts GM back in the day, the Jets drafting Kyle Brady over Warren Sapp. You see the Jets fans, their agony on their face.
But you're going to see more, and you start to see it, at least with the evolution of even fashion, right? But the brands that they build for themselves through NIL and, that they carry with them is going to infuse even more sort of the pop culture into the draft and into the narrative, right? So, as brands start to get worried because there's maybe less airtime to advertise for, it's going to be more, getting on the player, right, or getting on the field, or getting integrated into NFL culture as a means of advertising than just the 30-second spot.
It's interesting you use the word fashion, and fashion is in this book. In my projections forward, I think that fashion and fashion and food will play a larger and larger role in the Super Bowl week. Because as you're able to reach multiple nations with a single feed, for the last several years, the wives of the players have put on a fashion show. Well, imagine how you could turn this into, but it doesn't get covered, right? But if you turned it into an international fashion show, leading up to the Super Bowl, imagine the international viewers that you could get, particularly in some of these seats of fashion, Italy and France. I've got an idea for every year there's a Taste of the NFL. Taste of the NFL is a fundraiser. And what they do is they bring in food from, if you're in New Orleans this past year, New Orleans, and the great restaurants from New Orleans bring in their top chefs and bring in their specialty dishes. Well, you could do that with interest all around the world and have chefs creating the same dishes around the world. And you could have an international tasting. You could have voting for the best chefs. You could turn this into a week-long event that becomes part of, well, the Super Bowl means this.
Yeah.
It means expanding into fashion. It means expanding into food. There are all sorts of ways that culture and society love to get connected. And the more that we can, these 27 different territories is going to certainly become 50 different territories that the NFL has media rights for. And then as you can watch streaming, it can be a single streaming event that everybody in the world gets at once. There are lots of cool
when you think
ideas
about
like that.
monetization, right? Like they can create different properties to have sort of competing advertisers have their own slice of the pie, which is essentially what they're doing with, we'll give Sunday ticket to YouTube, we'll give Thursdays to Amazon, but, then you're still relegated to a slim pack or the quality of and whether people are tuning in. But there's others bringing in, viewers or other events. My mind went to, is that the format of the next World's Fair, right? So you have a culminating event in the game, but really you have companies coming in that are innovating in technology of bioscience, medical science, that are in and around player safety and rehab and treatment modalities. You have fashion, food, everything, right? It's like all of these from all over the world coming together. That's really something that the NFL has created a through line for.
Yeah, it's almost
everything that affects people. You could have, right, because it's as long as you're creative and you can think of, well, we could add this. If everybody's getting excited about the food, they could also get excited about these are the technological advancements that are now available to you that could make your life easier.
It's kind of like the only other sport that has that could create that kind of thing is it's like the Olympics, right? Because it's 4 weeks, something like that, 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
It's 18 days of competition, and then whatever leads up to it, and after that, yeah.
But there's you have the Olympic Village, and that's where the World's Fair is, but they have so much more time,
It would, curling would, if they did this around curling, there would be no competition. Sorry, NFL, but curling is what But it's like the psychological association of the excitement of football, right? That I think, and it's one element to kind of wrap your head
it's
around.
like a season
right?
unto
You watch
itself,
the
like
Olympics and you're
Christmas,
like, I don't care about it. Or you want to see a couple of the events, but there's so many events you're just like, never seen it, never played it, never tried it. Like everyone can throw a football, or you can you don't want to hit anyone, you throw some flags on your hips and you can kind of get out there and at least feel what it's like.
It's like when you go to a festival, there's going to be 6 stages, right? There's the main stage, which is the headline act, but a lot of people go to it, it's I'm just going to this band and this stage, it's the same thing. It's I'm just here for the fucking fashion show,
Yeah.
Which a lot of people, a good percentage of people tune into the Super Bowl just to see the new commercials.
Right.
Because it's become the world's largest festival of short films. And people want to see those. So, and there's been a little less of that anticipation now that the advertisers put them on 2-3 weeks ahead of time because they want to get more hits. But there are all sorts of things that can drive your interest that, yes, the NFL is looking for great ideas.
They should have an Emmys category for. That's my idea, Roger.
But as you start to think about this expansion, right, and each game not having necessarily more importance in the standings, but having more weight as far as its reach, I don't see the schedule ever really expanding that much further. I know a couple games, but there's limitations on the human body.
What is it,
right now,
17
right?
weeks?
They might make it one more week. So
they play 17 games in an 18-week season right now.
Yeah.
And when the collective bargaining agreement it ends in 2030.
2 bye weeks they're talking about?
So, yes, there will be, it could be either, they're going to want to go to 18 games because an odd number of games is just, It's unwieldy.
Yeah.
So they'll go to 18 games played in a 19 or 20-week season. And one of the other offshoots of that, byproducts of that, is that the Super Bowl will always be on President's Day weekend. So a lot of people saying, hey, why don't we make the Super Bowl a national holiday?
No one goes to work the day after it anyway.
Well, I did. There'll be a national holiday on that President's Day Monday, you know.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Or just put it on Saturday. But
No. Now, I talked about how people get into these routines. Saturday is for college football. Sunday has always been, of course, now you can watch it any day of the week.
Scott's nodding in approval.
Sunday is the day for NFL football. And that's a real hard viewing habit to overcome. And that's when you talk about playing on Sunday. And also, there is federal legislation that disallows NFL football on Fridays and on Saturdays when it goes up and competes against high school football or it competes against college football. If you as the NFL would lose your antitrust exemption for any games played on those days, so then that's a big loss of money. So they want to keep the Super Bowl on a Sunday. And also, there's no competition from anything else. Sunday is the day when most people have the most amount of time. There's ratings history over the years and years. Sunday evening was always the highest rated evening of the week because people were, all right, they're home, they're preparing for the week ahead, but they want to watch something all the way back to the days of the Ed Sullivan Show, which really was this variety show that had and a host who was very TV anti. I mean, he was a columnist from one of the New York newspapers when they put him in that role. But it was one of these things that this is something you're going to do on a Sunday night. So the Super Bowl has taken that time period, and it was talk about they were always dialed into Sunday afternoon is when NFL games are played. So the first, up until I believe 1978, all of the games were played in the afternoon. Super Bowls were a day game. And then they did the game starting at 6 o'clock at night in the New Orleans Superdome. And
why'd they choose that? Why?
Well, it was brand new.
Oh, okay.
And it was also, let's do this, and it's going to be under the lights. And those lights bouncing off of helmets. It was just this really, the ratings for the Super Bowl.
That was the first night game?
Yeah, it went up by 25% because it was in prime time, and it had this special look.
When did they start Monday Night Football? Sorry.
1970. So I'm telling you, it took the league 8 years to catch up to Monday Night Football. No. They started in Monday Night Football and were getting great ratings. They didn't move the Super Bowl until 1978.
Wow.
So from a what's next standpoint, what do you see as the next big evolution of the game or the experience? Travel is coming. Some of these things are coming, but the one thing that you think is going to be, this feels like a different product, or this is now an elevate. They found the next thing to sort of step up and create an experience around. Do you have any feelings around what that would be?
Well, one of the things that I think that you'll see over the next few years is also a safer sport. Is that the experimentation and the research going on now, and even just the fabrics of jerseys that they can repel impact and all these kinds of things that would make it a safer game. I was thinking back to 1985, the rules that they had. I mean, they were celebrating these plant the guy, I mean, the purple people eaters and the fearsome foursome and all of those defenses during the 1970s and the Steelers. There was very few rules about what you could do to offensive players. So there were far more injuries. They do want to have this image of the sport as not being a gladiator sport. However, gladiator sports get big audiences, and also if you see the decline in the number of high school football players, There are more things to do now, and if you do polls among these young people, that fewer of them are dedicated sports fans because there's so many other things to do on your smartphone, and that's what they're concerned about, get participation in sport. But if you make it safer and it becomes more attractive, and I really think they also need to address you'll probably see some kind of endorsements on the uniforms. A number of the teams actually now sell endorsements on their practice uniforms. So when anybody shows up, okay, there's a label, a logo there, and that would make it better. In the next 10 years, you're going to see definitely an international team, which will. And so that if that international team does really well, then you're going to have a playoff game at their stadium, et cetera. So those are some of the new wrinkles that I think the world may or may not be ready for. Certainly the people at Boom and at Lockheed, they're they can't wait.
Yeah. Well, it's just a matter of time until the NFL buys one of them, right? And then they can have their own fleet to fly their players around.
Right. You got 51, 52 players on your team, and you get the coaching staff, most of the coaching staff, on a jet that fits 80 people, and then the media that are going to cover that game, they all get one of those jets. They combine their budgets, and I think you can 3 or 4 jets, and suddenly you're playing just like you'd be playing a game here in the United States.
Feels like player safety, to your point, and some of the technology integrated into rules or kind of the replay. As a former player, you may worry about holdings calls now. Like they have to change the entire approach to playing since there's holding on every play. But
yeah, that is a little worrisome with AI because it can get too specific sometimes because there is an element of, refs just letting them play. And that's across all sports, not just football. So that could be an issue.
Because you want to have an attractive product.
Right. You don't want penalties every 2 seconds.
People want to be able to see a product that is exciting, that has action in it. And as you said, if there's only 11 minutes because a play lasts 5 seconds.
Right.
If a play lasts 5 seconds and there's 45 seconds until the next play, that's a bad ratio. Yeah.
There's so much interpretation, though, that I feel like that happens. And it's like super subjective, especially like with the safety issue.
Yeah.
It's like to one ref in one game, like that isn't an illegal hit. But it's like clearly obvious, an illegal hit. And it's frustrating as a fan,
Well, because they're trying to create
it.
a safe. It's not the hit, right? They're trying to create guidelines so that it's a safer sport, right? But
you either
whether you're in the
tackling
action
or
or whether it's innate in part of the gladiator's mind, right? So if they can create a safer outcome and not regulate every single nuance of the hit, right? What angle was the helmet at? Was it directly at shoulder pads, or was it a little bit higher? Like those are where this.
Are there
this
fewer players playing football? I don't know if you said that, Dennis,
youth,
or not.
Yeah,
like in terms of high school. So it's like parents. I mean, I don't know. I had at least 2-3 concussions playing high school football.
Yeah,
but I had shitty form as a tackler, and I was like 170 pounds. So
actually, I think if you make uniforms and helmets safer, you might wind up with a little bit of retraction from all of these rules, because now hitting each other is going to result in fewer injuries, even if it's a harder hit or you're hitting below the waist or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or using your helmet as a weapon, because
and it's going to be. I think some advancement in the playing surface is going to happen too. With early turf was essentially just concrete painted green, right? And now it's gone to nice cushy turf, but you're seeing a ton of knee injuries and other forms of non-contact stuff. So that's probably an area where we'll see some innovation that'll decrease
Has
those
the
types of
longevity of
injuries.
players? Are players playing longer now than they were 10, 15 years ago?
I think they are.
They are because there's nutrition, training, recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a short career because if you're thinking about the peak performance as what people want to see, irrespective of who you are, unless you're an outlier at the Hall of Famer, for the most part, that is still a limited
like
window.
3
Right?
years?
There's always more.
That's why I chose not to go into the NFL. I didn't see a future.
Right. 2.6 years is the average career. Like,
But it's a high risk, high reward
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
pursuit. Same as being a rock star. You know, think of all the rock stars who didn't become grandparents but they made a whole lot of money in a short period of time. So I don't think the number of high school players is going to make that much of a difference. There are 1 million high school football players playing 11-man football every year in the United States. Now, if it dips below 1 million, that'll be a headline news. But it could dip below 500,000, and you would still have enough players who want to risk their bodies for 2 or 3 years and make $18 to $20 million a year. So I don't see that as a problem. And if they do develop safer uniforms and safer helmets, you could wind up with, it becomes a little bit more of a gladiator sport with a little bit more of the contact, which you think of WWE, not WWE, the mixed martial arts,
UFC, yeah.
UFC, and that's, you can kick somebody in the head, and they're not wearing a helmet, and it's become this huge international sport. So I don't think you can have a sport that's going to have a big international appeal if it does get watered down.
There's also some of the underlying reality of kids that are showing talent and are potential professional athletes in football. Like, those aren't really the ones, I'd say statistically, that like their parents are like, you know what, like there's safer sports out there, right? It's like, it's my ass who was like bench warmer, like level talent that like parents are saying, you know what, why don't you go try this other sport? It's a little bit safer.
Like the parents who have the kids out there, it's like, my kid is killing all of those other kids.
Like,
push that one.
Like, so I think that's part of it, where it's like, you're not going to see such a reduction in the pool of those that get to
maybe the ones who shouldn't be playing anyways.
Right. It becomes less of a hobby sport, right, but more of a real
specialist discipline.
Equipment has helped a lot too, but what really has helped with longevity has been practicing. Like the week leading up to the game, it used to be, even I saw it throughout my career, like I started out in high school, basically every practice was a scrimmage, full tackle, full tilt, and then rules got implemented along the way where you weren't putting on your full pads until Wednesday, or Thursday was the only day you put pads on. Every day was just jerseys. And so you took a lot less strain off the body. You're only hitting once a week, and that's game day, too. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, football is not at the top of the list for sports that cause concussions.
What is
soccer? Soccer has more concussions. Cycling has more concussions. There are a lot of
know.
That seems counterintuitive. But go on.
A lot of people fall.
Stay up, Billy.
Well, Dennis, appreciate your time.
I really appreciate it. And
hit it again.
I'll tell you what. I did 15 years of research to produce this book. I started researching the Super Bowl and the NFL when I began this course at Syracuse University called the Super Bowl and Society. And every spring, I've been teaching this course. I taught it this year as well, this year via Zoom. But when I tell all the students the first day of class, I say, now, you're going to get feedback from your parents as to why are you taking a course about the Super Bowl. Here's what you tell them. It has a $40 billion a year impact just in the United States alone, and you will study a lot of things in college that don't have anywhere near that impact on our economy, on our society, on people gathering, making this the first secular holiday, the winter's 4th of July. There's a lot of things that have less impact that you'll study. The Napoleonic Wars are not going to change. So this is...
And you'll be able to read about those on...
And I've been researching it ever since. And every piece... And writing this book took about 2 years. And I finished it in the end of 2023. And it was published just last year. And every time you find a new fact, it causes you to ask another question. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? Why is that? What caused what? Those kinds of things. So I hope that there's a lot of that in this book because it starts with a little bit of the history of how did this. It's a league that started as semi-pros, you know, and now it's a global colossus in the span of 100 years. So where will it go in the next 60? Anyone can tell. I've got a few projections in there, but there'll be a lot of things that I haven't thought of.
Is there going to be a sequel?
Oh my goodness. 2 more years of work.
There'll have to be a progress report.
It's like 40 years from now.
I'll tell you what, you never know. The first book I wrote was called Sports on Television, and it was basically from my experience at ESPN and how sports gets made into television. And just about 5 or 6 years after that book came out, I did get a call from the publisher in London, saying, "Hey, we'd like to have a second edition." You know, so that turned into another 1.5 years of work. So you never know, but we'll see. You know, right now it's available. You can get it on Amazon, and I hope you enjoy it.